oceans. Communication between minds is not only metaphorical, it can be measured. Researchers studying social interaction have discovered a phenomenon called neural synchrony. When two people engage deeply in conversation or shared activity, their brain activity begins to align. Electrical rhythms recorded through imagine start to mirror each other. Patterns of neural firing become synchronized. This does not mean the brains become identical, but certain networks activate together as if two systems temporarily share a rhythm. Artificial intelligence processes information independently, but human cognition often operates in coordination. Consider musicians playing together, a jazz ensemble improvising, each performer listening, adjusting, responding. Neuroscientists have observed that their neural rhythms gradually synchronize. Timing becomes shared. Prediction becomes shared. The group begins to move as a single organism. Psychologists believe this synchrony strengthens understanding when attention aligns. Communication improves, ideas travel faster, misinterpretations decrease. The same phenomenon appears in classrooms when a teacher explains clearly and students engage deeply. Brain imaging sometimes reveals similar patterns of activity across multiple individuals, as if understanding creates resonance. Neural synchrony also explains empathy. When we observe another person's emotion, mirror sisters activate, simulating their experience inside our own brain. Artificial systems can model language, but human communication contains something more. Shared attention, shared rhythm, shared meaning. The brain evolved not only to think, but to connect, which means conversation is more than words. It is coordination, a subtle dance between neural systems, a learning moment by moment. As ideas move between minds, each person contributing a signal, each brain adjusting its pattern until understanding appears, not owned by one mind alone, but created between them. Neural synchrony reminds us that thought is not always solitary. Sometimes the clearest thinking emerges when two minds briefly share the same rhythm of attention. Neuroscience describes the brain as a map-making machine, not only mapping the world but mapping itself inside the cerebral cortex. Small regions organize information about the body, movement, touch, position. And these regions form what scientists call cortical maps. If you move your hand, a specific region activates. If you feel pressure on your fingertip, another region responds. Each part of the body has representation in neural space, but the map is not proportional. Hands occupy large areas, so do lips because precision matters. The brain allocates territory based on importance. Psychologists discovered that these maps can change. A violinist who practices daily expands the neural map for the left hand. The brain literally devotes more space to that movement. Artificial intelligence adjusts weights inside neural networks. Human brains are just representation based on experience. This adaptability is called cortical plasticity, and it explains how learning reshapes perception. But the maps extend beyond the body. Neuroscientists study identity, notice that self-representation activates similar mapping systems. Memories, values, roles, all organized within neural networks. The self is not a single location, it is a distributed pattern across cortical regions. Each memory a coordinate, each belief a reference point, each experience a new landmark. When psychologists say people reinvent themselves, they are describing a neural process. Old maps dissolve, new maps emerge. Artificial systems store information as structured files. Human identity is stored as shifting landscapes. Every conversation can redraw a border. Every insight can expand territory. The brain constantly updates the map, trying to answer one quiet question: where am I in relation to the world? And perhaps the most remarkable detail is that the map never finishes. Throughout life, experience keeps adding new pathways, new landmarks, new directions. The cortical map of the self is always incomplete, because the brain expects movement, growth, revision, a life still unfolding across the surface of the mind. Neuroscience once focused mostly on how the brain perceives the outside world. Vision, sound, touch, and movement, but researchers gradually discovered another system of perception, one directed inward. This system is called interoception. Interoception is the brain's ability to sense signals from inside the body. Heartbeat, breathing, temperature, hunger, fatigue, all produce information that travels through neural pathways to the brain. The insular cortex plays a central role, acting as a map of internal states. Each heartbeat, each breath, each subtle physiological change is registered as part of conscious experience. Psychologists studying emotion found that feelings are closely linked to interoception. interprets bodily signals and labels them as emotional states. A rapid heartbeat may become anxiety. A steady rhythm may feel like calm. Artificial intelligence processes information externally, but human cognition integrates the body into perception. This integration explains why emotional awareness often begins physically. A tight chest during stress, a relaxed breath during safety, a subtle warmth during connection. Interoception also influences decision making. Research shows that individuals who accurately sense their heartbeat often demonstrate stronger emotional awareness, because internal signals provide feedback about psychological states. Mindfulness practices often train this awareness by focusing attention on breathing or subtle bodily sensations. The brain strengthens its connection to internal perception, gradually improving regulation. Artificial systems analyze data streams, human systems experience embodiment. The brain and body operate as a continuous loop. Signals rise from the body. Interpretation emerges in the brain, meaning appears. Interoception reminds us that cognition is not only abstract thought, it is physical awareness. Every emotion, every moment of tension, every feeling of safety contains bodily information. Quiet signals beneath conscious thought, guiding perception, shaping mood, informing instinct. The brain listens constantly to these internal messages, translating sensation into meaning, and through that translation, the body becomes not just a vessel, but an essential voice inside the mind. Behavioral neuroscience often studies learning through a simple mechanism. Reinforcement: an organism performs an action, and the environment responds. If the outcome is positive, the behavior strengthens. If the outcome is negative, the behavior weakens. This process forms reinforcement loops. Tiny cycles between action and consequence. The brain does not simply store memories, it calculates probability. What behavior is likely to produce reward? What behavior is likely to produce discomfort? Over time, the nervous system updates these expectations. Neurons adjust connections based on outcomes. Psychologists studying habit notice that repetition alone does not create automatic behavior. The key variable satisfying result. The brain begins to compress the decision process. The prefrontal cortex steps back and the basal ganglia takes control. What once required thought becomes routine. Artificial intelligence uses a similar concept called reinforcement learning. Algorithms explore environments, testing actions, updating probabilities, maximizing reward. But human reinforcement loops are influenced by emotion. A compliment can reinforce effort. Recognition can reinforce creativity. Even subtle approval from others can shape behavior. The brain registers signals that are not purely material, meaning social reinforcement can become as powerful as physical reward. Habits therefore emerge from accumulated loops. Wake up, check messages, receive stimulation, study, solve problem, experience satisfaction. Exercise, feel progress, repeat effort. Each cycle strengthens a pathway. Neuroscientists describe this as the automation of behavior. The brain reduces cognitive load by converting repeated actions into efficient sequences. But reinforcement loops can also trap attention when short-term rewards override long-term goals. A loop continues even when the outcome no longer serves us. Understanding the loop creates awareness, and awareness creates interruption. The moment between impulse and action becomes visible. Artificial systems optimize loops through calculation. Human systems optimize them through reflection. The brain learns constantly, not through single events, but through repetition of experience. Every action leaves a trace. Every consequence updates the system until behavior becomes pattern. And the pattern quietly defines a direction of a life. Neuroscientists studying attention often speak about three large networks inside the brain: the default mode network, the executive control network, and the salience network. Each system plays a different role in shaping awareness. The salience network acts like a switch. It determines what deserves attention and what should fade into the background. Imagine walking through a city. Your brain receives thousands of signals, voices, traffic, advertisements, or reflections of light, movement in every direction. Yet you notice only a few. The salience network filters the environment, highlighting what seems important. A sudden sound activated immediately. A familiar voice changes focus. A surprising movement redirects awareness. Two regions play a major role, the anterior insular and the anterior cingulate cortex. Together they evaluate incoming signals, deciding what matters now. Artificial intelligence processes information without emotional priority, but human attention is guided by meaning. Emotion, novelty, and relevance all influence what becomes salient. Psychologists discovered that this network also connects internal states. Hunger, fatigue, pain, and emotional stress all signal the brain to shift attention. The salience network therefore balances internal needs and external events. When functioning smoothly, the mind transitions between thought mode, from reflection to action, from memory to decision, from rest to alertness. But when stress increases, the system becomes sensitive. Minor signals may appear overwhelming. Small distractions pull attention away from important tasks. Mindfulness research shows something interesting. Focused breathing and awareness practices help stabilize this network, reducing unnecessary switching, allowing attention to remain steady. Artificial systems prioritize information through algorithms. Human attention relies on interpretation. The brain asks constantly what matters most right now. This question guides perception, shapes behavior, and influences memory, because what becomes salient becomes remembered. The salient network is therefore a quiet director inside the mind, choosing which signals rise and which dissolve into silence. From the chaos of sensation, it creates a single line of focus, guiding the brain toward what it believes matters most. In neuroscience, learning begins at the synapse. A synapse is the microscopic space between neurons, where electrical signals become chemical messages. When one neuron fires, neurotransmitters across the gap activate on the next cell. This tiny exchange, repeated billions of times, forms the architecture of thought. Psychologists studying learning focus on a principle called synaptic plasticity. The brain's ability to strengthen connections between neurons that fire together. The phrase often used is cells that fire together, wire together. Each experience activates specific circuits. The more frequently those circuits activate, the stronger their connections become. Artificial intelligence uses a comparable idea. Neural networks adjust connection ways based on data. Patterns that appear often become reinforced. Human learning operates similarly. Repetition strengthens memory. Practice strengthens skill. Attention strengthens understanding. But plasticity is not only about repetition. Emotion plays a role. Events tied to strong feeling create create stronger synaptic changes. The amygdala interacts with memory systems, amplifying important experiences, which explains why emotionally charged moments remain vivid long after ordinary events fade. Childhood memories often follow this pattern. A single meaningful moment can shape perception for years because the synaptic change was powerful. Neuroscientists also discovered that plasticity continues through life. Never becomes fully fixed. New experiences create new pathways. Old pathways can weaken when unused. Learning a language, practicing music, developing new skills all reshape neural networks. Artificial intelligence must be retrained with new data sets. Human intelligence reconfigures itself through experience, through curiosity, through effort, through reflection. Synaptic plasticity reveals something profound. Identity is not static. The brain is continuously adapting. Each decision, each conversation, each new idea leaves a trace. Tiny adjustments inside neural circuits until the person you become tomorrow is slightly different from the one you were yesterday. Learning then is not accumulation alone, it is transformation, a quiet rewriting of neural pathways where experience reshapes the mind, one connection at a time. Neuroscientists study emotion, often ask a simple question: how does the brain recover from distress? Emotion appears suddenly, but regulation requires effort. The amygdala detects emotional relevance. It responds quickly to threat, to reward, to uncertainty. But regulation is coordinated elsewhere, in the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for planning, reasoning, and evaluation. When strong emotion arises, signals travel between these systems. The amygdala reacts immediately. The prefrontal cortex evaluates the situation. Psychologists call this process emotional regulation. The ability to influence how emotion unfolds. Regulation does not mean suppressing feeling. In fact, research shows suppression often increases stress. Instead, effective regulation changes interpretation. This method is known as reappraisal. The brain re-examines the meaning of an event. A criticism becomes feedback. A failure becomes information. A delay becomes preparation through reinterpretation. The emotional signal shifts. Brain imaging studies show that reappraisal reduces amygdala activation while increasing activity in the prefrontal cortex, meaning the brain learns to guide emotion rather than erase it. Artificial intelligence does not experience emotion, it processes signals without feeling. But human cognition must integrate both. Emotion provides urgency, reason provides direction. Together they shape behavior. Athletes use regulation during competition. When frustration rises, they reset attention, refocus breath, reinterpret pressure as challenge. Musicians do the same before performance, transforming anxiety into concentration. Psychologists emphasize that regulation is a skill developed gradually through awareness, through reflection, through repeated practice. Each experience teaches the brain how to respond differently next time. Emotional regulation does not remove difficulty, but it expands choice between reaction and response. Artificial systems optimize efficiency, human minds optimize balance between feeling and interpretation, between instinct and reflection. And in that space where emotion meets understanding, the brain learns not how to avoid being human, but how to navigate the intensity of being one. In neuroscience, dopamine is often misunderstood. Popular culture calls it the pleasure chemical, but researchers describe it differently. Dopamine is not reward, it is anticipation. The brain releases dopamine not when pleasure arrives, but when the possibility of reward appears. The signal emerges during expectation, before the outcome is known. Experiments with animals revealed something fascinating. When a reward appears unexpectedly, dopamine spikes strongly. But when the reward becomes predictable, the spike shifts. It appears earlier at the signal that predicts the reward. The brain learns patterns, adjusting its internal timing. Artificial intelligence models reinforcement in a similar way. Algorithms update behavior based on reward signals, but human dopamine systems interact with emotion, memory, and attention, making the process far more complex. Consider motivation. A student studying late, an athlete repeating drills, a musician practicing scales. The reward is distant, yet dopamine sustains effort, because the brain predicts future value. This prediction creates energy. Psychologists describe this as a motivation loop. Expectation generates effort. Effort increases progress. Progress strengthens expectation. The cycle repeats. The dopamine also responds to uncertainty. Unexpected rewards produce stronger signals, which explains why novelty feels exciting, why discovery activates curiosity, why new experiences feel vivid. The brain is tuned to explore, not just to obtain. Addiction research reveals the darker side. Artificial rewards can hijack the dopamine system, providing rapid signals without meaningful effort. The brain begins to chase the signal itself instead of the experience. anticipation, the moment before achievement, the moment before the note resolves, the moment before the finish line appears. That suspended interval where possibility still exists, where effort still matters, where the brain leans forward expecting something worth reaching, and releases just enough signal to keep moving toward it. Neuroscientists describe the brain as a prediction machine. Every moment the mind attempts to anticipate the future, not seconds ahead, but fractions of experience. The brain constantly asks, what happens next? What sound follows this note? What emotion follows this glance? This process is known as predictive processing. The brain forms expectations based on previous experience, using memory to construct a model of reality. Incoming information is compared against that model. When the prediction matches reality, the brain remains efficient, little energy required. But when reality differs, something remarkable happens. The brain produces a signal called prediction error. Called prediction error. A mismatch between expectation and observation. Prediction error is not failure, it is learning. The brain adjusts its model to better understand the world. Artificial intelligence learns similarly. Machine learning algorithms optimize predictions by minimizing error. Each incorrect guess updates the system. Human cognition works through the same principle, but emotion is part of the signal. Surprise is prediction and error. Curiosity is prediction error. Even humor emerges when expectation suddenly shifts. The joke works because the brain predicts one outcome and receives another. Love also contains prediction error. Conversation goes deeper than expected. A person reveals unexpected kindness. The mind updates its model of that person. Trust begins forming. Psychologists suggest that growth itself is built on these signals. Every unexpected moment reshape understanding. Every contradiction forces revision. Prediction error keeps perception flexible. Without it, the brain would become rigid, locked into old assumptions. Artificial intelligence refines predictions through data. Predictions through experience, through surprise, through dialogue, through mistakes, through moments where reality refuses to follow our expectations. The discovery inside every change, belief inside every moment. When the world turns out slightly different than the mind expected, and the model of reality becomes just a little more accurate. Becomes In cognitive neuroscience, memory is not a recording, it is reconstruction. Each time a memory returns, the brain rewrites it, neurons fire again. Not to replay the past, but to rebuild it. Psychologists discovered that remembering and imagining the future activates similar regions. The hippocampus weaves fragments, emotion, context, sensory traces into something that feels continuous. But the brain never stores a perfect copy. Instead it stores pieces of scent attached to childhood, the color of a room linked to a conversation, the tone of a voice carry a meaning long after the words fade. When the brain retrieves memory, it gathers these fragments like scattered notes, reassembling a melody. Artificial intelligence stores information and structured data. Human memory stores experience as emotion. That is why two people can remember the same event and tell two different stories. Neuroscientists describe memory reconsolidation, a process where recalled memories become unstable before being stored again, meaning each recollection changes the past slightly. Modifies detail, new understanding reshapes interpretation. What once felt painful may later appear instructive. What once seemed trivial may gain significance. The brain edits memory to maintain coherence, to build identity, because the self is partly constructed from remembered narratives. Trauma research shows another dimension. Emotional intensity is too strong. The amygdala amplifies the memory, making fragments vivid while context disappears. A sound, a smell, a location can reactivate the entire network years later. But the brain also possesses plasticity, the ability to reshape associations through reflection, therapy, conversation, and time. Attach themselves to old events. The neural pathway changes, the emotional way soften. Artificial systems retrieve data exactly, but human memory is creative. Each recollection a quiet revision, each reflection a new interpretation. Memory then is not a museum, it is a studio where the brain continuously edits the past, not to deceive but to survive. Because identity is not a fixed memory is not permanent. Each time the brain recalls an experience, the memory becomes unstable. For a brief moment, it opens like a file being edited. This phenomenon is called memory reconsolidation. Researchers discovered that when a memory is retrieved, the neural pathways that store it temporarily loosen, allowing modification before the memory is stored again. Artificial intelligence retrieves information without altering the original data, but human memory is unlimited. Every recollection changes the past slightly. Emotion plays a role in this process. When a memory returns in a new emotional context, the brain updates its meaning, and event once interpreted as humiliation may later become a lesson. A difficult conversation may transform into understanding. The original details may remain, but interpretation evolves. Psychologists studying trauma have focused deeply on reconsolidation, because painful memories often carry strong emotional charge when recalled in safe conditions. The brain can attach new emotional associations, reducing distress while preserving knowledge. Therapeutic methods sometimes rely on this principle, revisiting memory not to erase it, but to reshape the emotional response. Artificial systems store fixed records. Human mind store living narratives. Every memory interacts with identity, and identity continues changing, which means the past itself is partly rewritten, not through deception, but through reinterpretation. Memory reconsolidation reveals a remarkable truth. The brain is not an archive, it is an editor, continuously revising the story of experience. Each recollection a quiet opportunity to integrate new understanding and transform what once felt rigid into something that fits the person you have become. The past, therefore, is not frozen. It moves with you as the brain reorganizes meaning across time. Neuroscience once believed that the adult brain was mostly fixed, that development ended after childhood, and the structure of the mind became permanent. But modern research revealed a different story. The brain remains changeable across the entire lifespan. This capacity is called neuroplasticity, the ability of neural networks to reorganize in response to experience. Every time you learn a new skill, neurons strengthen their connections. Every time you practice, the signal pathway becomes faster, more efficient. Artificial intelligence updates models through training data. Human brains update themselves through life. Experience is the dataset, practice is the training loop. Recovery research feel the power of plasticity. Patients who lost motor function after brain injury sometimes regain movement because other neural circuits adapted, reorganizing to perform similar roles. The brain does not simply break, it rewires. Psychologists studying habit formation observe similar processes. Repeated behavior changes neural structure. Gradually the brain allocates more resources to pathways that are used frequently, meaning the mind becomes what it practices. Curiosity strengthens curiosity. Creativity strengthens creativity. Attention strengthens attention. Oh, artificial systems optimize patterns through algorithms. Oh, human minds optimize themselves through experience. Dastakidi also explains why learning never stops. Even in later life, new languages, new skills, new ideas all reshape neural pathways. Each challenge forces adaptation. Each success stabilizes the circuit. The brain is not a finished object. It is a process, continuously adjusting, continuously reorganizing. The future of the mind is therefore not predetermined. It is constructed through what we practice, through what we notice, through what we repeat. Neuroplasticity reminds us that identity is never entirely fixed. Becoming something slightly different with every experience it learns from. Time feels constant, but the brain does not measure it like a clock. Neuroscience suggests that human perception of time is elastic. Moments stretch, moments collapse, depending on attention, emotion, and novelty. Psychologists studying temporal perception notice the pattern when an experience is new. The brain processes more information. Each detail demands attention because prediction is still uncertain. This increased processing makes time appear slower. A first journey to a new city feels long. Every street, every sound, every color registers deeply, but repetition changes perception. When an environment becomes familiar, the brain compresses its processing. Less attention required, fewer details stored in the same hour. Passes quickly. Artificial intelligence records time precisely. Human cognition interprets it. Emotion plays a powerful role. Fear or danger activates rapid information processing. The brain attempts to evaluate every signal, which creates the illusion of slow time. Athletes often describe this phenomenon: a ball approaching a moment, stretching, a decision appearing inside a fraction of a second. The nervous system is simply processing more information in the same interval. Psychologists also discovered that memory changes temporal perception. Periods filled with adverse experiences leave many memory traces. Looking back, they feel long. Routine periods create fewer memories and appear shorter in retrospect, which means life's perceived length depends partly on novelty. duration, not through seconds, but through meaning. And perhaps this explains why the richest moments in memory are rarely the longest. They are simply the most alive. Yeah. In cognitive psychology, attention behaves like a limited resource. The brain cannot process everything equally. Instead, it distributes effort across tasks. Researchers call this cognitive load, the amount of mental effort required to process information. Working memory holds only a small number of elements at once. When too many signals compete, performance declines. Artificial intelligence can scale computation by adding resources. Human cognition must balance effort. Psychologists study and learn and describe three kinds of cognitive load. Intrinsic load. The difficulty inherent in a task. Extraneous load. Extraneous load. Extraneous load. Unnecessary complexity that interferes with understanding. And germane load. Germane load. The mental effort that builds knowledge. The brain functions best when extraneous load is minimized. Clarity reduces friction. Structure improves comprehension. Teachers who organize ideas step by step allow work and memory to focus on meaning rather than confusion. Artificial systems store vast quantities of data, but human learning depends on pattern. When information is grouped logically, the brain recognizes relationships. Understanding emerges. Athletes experience similar dynamics. A beginner, must consciously think about every movement, balance, timing, coordination. Each step requires attention, but through practice, motor memory forms, reducing cognitive load. The body moves without deliberate calculation. Musicians follow the same path at first. Each note requires focus. Later, the melody flows naturally. The brain has optimized its internal pathways. Cognitive load theory reminds us that intelligence is not only capacity, it is organization. The mind becomes effective when information is structured well. Artificial intelligence processes information through layer networks. Human understanding emerges through hierarchy. Concept, connection, context. Each layer reducing confusion until complexity transforms into clarity. And the mind moves smoothly from effort to comprehension. In neuroscience, the brain adapts quickly to repetition. This process is called habituation. When a stimulus appears for the first time, the brain reacts strongly. Attention rises, neural activity increases. But if the same stimulus repeats again and again, without meaningful consequence, the brain gradually reduces its response. Habituation allows the mind to conserve energy, ignoring signals that no longer require action. Artificial intelligence can process repeated input without fatigue, but human cognition filters experience through adaptation. Imagine entering a room with a strong scent at first. The smell feels overwhelming, yet after a few minutes you barely notice it. The sensory system has habituated. The same principle applies to sound. The hum of an air conditioner, the ticking of a clock, traffic beyond the window, signals that initially attract attention eventually dissolve into the background. Psychologists discovered that habituation extends beyond the senses. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Feel stressful at first, but repeated exposure reduces anxiety. The brain updates its model of safety through experience. Artificial systems adjust sensitivity through parameters. Human systems adjust perception through familiarity. Habituation therefore creates stability, allowing attention to focus on novelty. Without it, every repeated signal will remain intense. The mind would struggle to distinguish important change from constant noise. But a habituation also reveals a paradox when meaningful signals repeat too often. The brain may ignore the messages, lose urgency, warnings fade, even appreciation can diminish. This phenomenon is sometimes called hedonic adaptation. The mind returns to baseline even after positive change. Understanding habituation changes perspective. Attention becomes intentional. Gratitude becomes deliberate, because what once felt extraordinary may gradually become ordinary. The brain protects efficiency, but awareness can restore significance. Artificial systems optimize signal detection. Human minds learn when to listen and when to let the background remain silent. 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 In a rush tense, motivation is rarely a single moment. It is a gradient, a shifting signal that changes intensity as goals approach. Researchers studying the dopamine system notice the pattern. Dopamine neurons do not simply respond to reward itself. They respond to prediction. The brain calculates distance between present state and desired outcome. And that distance creates motivation. The closer the brain believes the reward to be, the stronger the motivational signal. Psychologists call this the reward gradient effect. Effort increases as progress becomes visible. Artificial intelligence optimizes objectives through reward functions. Human motivation operates through expectation. A student studying for months may feel slow progress, but as the exam approaches, focus intensifies. An athlete training for a competition feels the same shift as the event draws near. Effort sharpens. The brain detects proximity, and dopamine amplifies attention. This system helps explain why early stages of long projects feel difficult. The goal is distant, the gradient is shallow, but as milestones appear, completion becomes imaginable. The motivational slope steepens, energy rises. Psychologists discovered that visible progress dramatically increases persistence. When individuals see a path forward. The brain interprets the task as achievable, which strengthens engagement. Artificial systems calculate probability precisely. Human systems estimate it emotionally. The perception of progress matters as much as progress itself. Isn't why small achievements have psychological power. They reshape the gradient, reducing perceived distance and signaling that effort is working. Motivation, therefore, is not constant. It moves, rising and falling as perception changes. Each step forward adjusts the brain's model. Each milestone reshapes expectation until eventually the mind realizes the goal is not abstract anymore. It is near, and at that moment the brain releases a surge of energy because progress has transformed possibility into something almost within reach.
In social psychology, there is a theory that explains a common tension inside human thought. Cognitive dissonance. The concept was introduced by psychologist Leon Festinger, who noticed that people experience discomfort when beliefs and actions do not align. The mind prefers coherence, a stable narrative about who we are. But life rarely follows perfect consistency. A person may value honesty yet tell a small lie. A person may believe in discipline, yet postpone effort. These contradictions create dissonance, a psychological friction. The brain interprets this tension as something that must be resolved. There are several ways the mind reduces dissonance. The first is behavioral change. If an action conflicts with belief, the person may alter behavior to restore harmony. But another strategy is cognitive adjustment. Instead of changing behavior, the mind adjusts interpretation. A difficult task becomes unnecessary. A mistake becomes justified. A belief, sub-belief shift. Psychologists observe that people often modify beliefs more easily than behavior, because belief is flexible and behavior may carry consequences. Artificial intelligence does not experience dissonance. Conflicting data is simply processed through optimization. But human cognition is deeply narrative. Identity depends on consistency. The story you tell yourself must make sense. And even when reality is complicated, experiments revealed a fascinating pattern. When individuals perform a difficult task with little reward, they sometimes report liking the task more. The brain reinterprets the experience, because otherwise the effort would feel irrational. This process protects the self, maintaining the belief that actions have meaning. Cognitive dissonance therefore reveals something about human identity. We do not simply act, we explain, we interpret, we construct narratives that connect decisions to values. The mind searches constantly for alignment between belief and behavior.
cognitive neuroscience. Attention is never neutral. The brain does not treat all information equally. It selects, ranks, filters, and one of the systems responsible for that filtering is the science network, a circuit involving the anterior insula and anterior cingulate cortex, working constantly to answer one question: what matters now? The world offers too many signals: a passing conversation, a shift in expression, a sudden sound in the distance, a memory appearing without warning. If the brain tried to hold all of it equally, perception would collapse under its own weight. So the salience network acts like a curator, highlighting novelty, emotion, threat, opportunity, anything that might require a change in behavior. Artificial intelligence can assign importance through weights and priorities, but human attention is tied to feeling. A message from a stranger and a message from someone you love may contain the same number of words, yet the brain treats them differently, because science is not about quantity, it is about relevance. Research has discovered that surprise plays a major role here. When something violates expectation, the salience network activates, the mind shifts, attention narrows, prediction pauses, and for a brief moment the brain says, look again. Athletes know this feeling. A defender notices the smallest change in body angle. A tennis player reads a shoulder turn before the serve. The signal is tiny, but its silence is immense. Reaction depends on noticing it early. Everyday life contains similar moments: a change in someone's tone, a pause that feels longer than it should, a familiar room suddenly feeling strange. The brain marks these moments not because they are loud, but because they matter. Psychologists suggest that meaning itself may depend on salience. What we remember is rarely everything, it is what stood out. What interrupted prediction? What pulled the spotlight of awareness? This is why memory often feels uneven. Whole weeks disappear, yet one sentence returns vividly, because the brain did not store time equally, it stored significance. Artificial systems process information with consistency. Human minds process information with hierarchy. The unexpected rises, the ordinary fades, and consciousness moves accordingly. Salience then is not just attention, it is selection, a silent editorial process inside the mind, choosing which moments become meaningful, which signals become memory, and which surprises quietly change the direction of thought.
once believed that observation and action were separate processes. But in the early 1990s, researchers studying primates discovered something unusual. Certain neurons fired not only when an animal performed an action, but also when it watched another individual perform the same action. These cells became known as mirror neurons. They revealed a powerful principle. The brain does not merely observe behavior, it simulates it. When you watch someone reach for a cup, your motor cortex activates subtly, as if rehearsing the same movement. Artificial intelligence can analyze actions as visual data, but human brains experience embodied observation. Mirror systems extend beyond physical movement. Psychologists believe they play a role in empathy. When someone nearby expresses sadness, the observer's brain activates neural regions associated with similar emotion. Not perfectly, but partially a small internal echo. This neural resonance helps humans understand one another, because the brain translates observation into experience. Social learning depends heavily on this mechanism. Children do not learn only through instruction. They learn by watching gestures, tone of voice, facial expressions all become templates for behavior. Artificial systems can copy patterns through training, but human imitation is intertwined with emotion, meaning. Observation changes internal state. Mirror neuron research also suggests why storytelling feels powerful when we watch a character struggle or succeed. The brain simulates parts of that experience, allowing us to feel events that never happened to us directly. This capacity expands understanding beyond personal experience. Empathy then becomes a cognitive bridge, connecting minds through simulation, through resonance, through neural reflection. Mirror neurons remind us that perception is never passive. Every observed gesture, every shared emotion, every silent interaction creates activity inside the brain. A small reflection of another person's state. Two nervous systems briefly overlapping through invisible signals, and within that overlap, understanding begins, not as logic alone, but as resonance between minds, learning to recognize each other. Nourishance. Trust is not only a feeling, it is chemistry. When humans interact with safety and connection, the brain releases a neuropeptide called oxytocin, often described as the bonding molecule. Oxytocin plays a role in social attachment. It appears during parent and child contact, during close friendship, during moments of emotional vulnerability. Researchers discovered that oxytocin modulates neural circuits associated with trust. The amygdala normally scans for threat, evaluating uncertainty in other people, but oxytocin reduces defensive response, allowing the brain to interpret signals as safe. This shift changes behavior. People become more open, more cooperative, more willing to share information. Artificial intelligence processes communication without emotional chemistry, but human interaction is shaped by biological signals.
hormones, neurotransmitters, and neural feedback loops all influence social perception. Trust also involves prediction. The brain builds models about other people's behavior. When someone acts consistently, the model strengthens. The brain expects reliability. Psychologists describe this as predictive trust. Repeated experience creates stability. But trust can also emerge quickly in moments of vulnerability. When one person reveals something personal, the other brain responds, interpreting honesty as a social signal. Neural networks involved in empathy activate simultaneously. Artificial systems exchange information. Humans exchange meaning, which is why tone of voice, facial expression, and timing carry enormous weight. Trust forms gradually through small confirmations. A promise kept, a message returned, a moment of attention. When it matters, each event updates the brain's model, increasing confidence in the relationship. Oxytocin does not create blind trust, but it lowers barriers long enough for connection to begin. And once trust forms, the brain reorganizes perception. Threat feels smaller, cooperation feels natural, communication flows easier. Trust therefore is not abstract, it is biological, a chemical dialogue between nervous systems, quietly shaping how people decide to stand with one another.
In cognitive psychology, there is a concept known as theory of mind. It refers to the ability to understand that other people have thoughts, beliefs, intentions, and emotions that may differ from our own. This ability seems simple, but it represents a remarkable cognitive achievement. The brain must construct an internal model of another person's mind, not only observing behavior, but predicting intention. Young children gradually develop this capacity. Psychologists often study it through experiments involving belief and perspective. In one classic example, a child watches as an object is placed in a box. Later, another person moves the object to a different location. When asked where someone will search for the object, younger children often answer with the object's current location because they assume everyone knows what they know. But older children recognize something deeper, that the other person holds a different belief, even if that belief is incorrect. This shift marks the development of theory of mind. The brain learns that knowledge is not shared automatically. Neuroscience research suggests that several brain regions support this process. Parts of the medial prefrontal cortex, the temporoparietal junction, and areas associated with social cognition. These regions help construct simulations of other people's perspectives. Artificial intelligence can analyze language patterns, predict preferences, recognize emotional tone. But understanding intention remains more complex because human minds constantly update their internal models of one another in conversation.
people track not only the words spoken, but the beliefs behind them, the emotional context, the possible motivations. This allows cooperation, negotiation, empathy. It also allows misunderstanding, because theory of mind relies on inference, and inference is sometimes wrong. We guess what others think, but the guess is not always accurate, which is why communication remains essential. Psychologists often describe human society as a network of minds predicting other minds, each person building models of everyone around them. Those models change with experience. Trust grows when predictions prove accurate. Confusion grows when expectations fail. Theory of mind also shapes stories felt, and when we read a novel, watch a film, or listen to music, we imagine the perspective of characters we have never met. The brain rehearses their motivations, their choices, their emotions. In doing so, we expand our cognitive map of human behavior, the ability to understand another mind may be one of the most powerful human abilities, because it allows cooperation between strangers, learning across generations, cultures, shared being, shared meaning. Theory of mind reminds us that every conversation contains more than words. It contains assumptions, predictions, interpretations, and silent models of each other's thinking, which means understanding someone is it is a process, a negotiation between two minds, each attempting to imagine what the other might be thinking. In neuroscience, there is a concept that changed how scientists understand learning. Neuroplasticity. For many years the brain was believed to be mostly fixed, a structure that developed early and then stabilized. But research revealed a different story. The brain is adaptable and dynamic, capable of rewiring itself through experience. Neurons communicate through synaptic connections, and these connections are not permanent. They strengthen with repeated activation. They weaken when unused. This process is often described as synaptic plasticity. One well-known principle states neurons that fire together, wire together. When two neural pathways activate simultaneously, their connection strengthens, which means practice changes the brain. Every skill, every habit, every pattern of thought leaves a structural trace. Athletes understand this even without neuroscience. Repetition builds instinct. A basketball player does not calculate every movement. Their brain has encoded the motion. Musicians develop similar pathways, finger movement, timing, rhythm perception. All refined through neural adaptation. Artificial intelligence learns through training data. Human brains learn through lived experience. Each repetition updates the network. Each mistake refines the pattern. Even emotional responses are shaped by plasticity. A person who repeatedly interprets situations as threatening strengthens fear pathways, but new experience can reshape those patterns. Practice exposure, learning, all engage the same biological principle. Plasticity also explains recovery after injury when one neural pathway is damaged. Other pathways can reorganize, taking on new roles. The brain is constantly negotiating efficiency, reassigning function, optimize communication. Childhood is a period of intense plasticity, but adult brains retain this capacity, which means change remains possible. Even later in life, habits, beliefs, skills, perception, all can evolve through consistent experience. Neuroplasticity reveals that identity is not a fixed design. It is out in a network shaped by interaction with the world. Each conversation, each decision, each repeated action, quietly adjusting the structure of the mind. The brain we carry today is not exactly the brain we had yesterday. Because experience is always writing into the architecture of thought, which means growth, learning, and transformation are not abstract ideas. They are biological events happening inside the brain. Every moment we engage with the world. In your oceans, there exists a network that becomes active, not when the brain is focused on the outside world, but when attention turns inward. Researchers call it the default mode network, a system of interconnected regions, including parts of the medial prefrontal cortex, the posterior cingulate cortex, and the angular gyrus. These regions activate during moments of rest. When the mind drifts, when memory surfaces, when the brain constructs stories about the self. For a long time
structured reflection. The brain evaluates choices, relationships, long-term goals, potential threats, potential opportunities. The default mode network links memory, emotion, and imagination. This network may also explain why humans can understand other minds, because imagining another person's thoughts requires constructing an internal model of their perspective, of their possible intentions. When the default mode network works in balance, reflection becomes insight. Self-awareness grows, creative connections emerge. Many artists, scientists, and writers report their best ideas arriving during moments of quiet thought. Walking alone, watching the sky, riding a train. These moments activate internal simulation, but when the network becomes too dominant, rumination appears. The mind repeats old narratives, replays mistakes, reconstructs fears. Neuroscience suggests that mental health often depends on balance between internal reflection and external engagement, between the default mode network and task-focused networks. The brain is constantly shifting states, from action to reflection, from perception to imagination, from the world outside to the story within. The default mode network is therefore not idle. It is the architecture of personal narrative, the space where identity is edited, where experience is reorganized, where the brain asks quietly, who am I? And where does the next version of that story go? Mother did not know what they did. Na da da da. In the early 1990s, neuroscientists studying motor control in the premortal cortex of macaque monkeys noticed something unexpected. A group of neurons activated when the monkey grasped an object. That part was not surprising, but those same neurons also activated when the monkey simply watched another monkey perform the same action. Observation alone triggered the motor representation. These cells became known as mirror neurons. The discovery suggested that the brain does not only record behavior, it simulates it. When a person watches another person reach, lift, run, or smile, their own motor system quietly rehearses the same act. Not enough to move the muscles, but enough to represent the action internally. This mechanism may explain why learning through observation is so efficient. Athletes watch game footage not only to analyze, but to encode movement. The brain rehearses each motion, each time an adjustment, each decision as if performing the action itself. Psychologists also began to connect mirror systems to empathy. When someone observes another person in pain, activity appears in neural regions associated with pain processing. Not identical but overlapping, the brain partially simulates the emotional state of another person, which means understanding others may not be purely cognitive.
live, it may be embodied. Artificial intelligence recognizes patterns through data mapping. Human perception often recognizes intention through internal simulation. The brain does not only see what someone does, it models why they do it. This capacity supports imitation, cooperation, language development, and cultural transmission. Children learn gestures, tone of voice, social behavior by observing others. The mirror neuron framework suggests that human cognition is fundamentally relational. Action is rarely isolated. Movement communicates intention. Posture communicates emotion. A raised eyebrow, a sudden pause, a quick shift in tone, all become signals that the brain interprets through simulation. Even in conversation, subtle mirroring occurs. People unconsciously match speech, rhythm, posture, and facial expression. The synchronization creates rapport, a quiet alignment between nervous systems. Researchers caution that mirror neurons are not a complete explanation for empathy. Human social cognition involves many networks, but the concept reveals something important. The boundary between self and other may be more fluid than once believed. Observation is never passive. Perception is active each moment. The brain models the behavior of others. Testing possibilities, predicting outcomes, understanding intention through simulation, which means human connection may begin not with language but with resonance. The silent moment when one nervous system recognizes itself inside another. Incorporating their essence, there is a framework called social baseline theory. The idea challenges a very common assumption that the human brain is designed to function alone. Instead, the theory proposes that the brain expects social proximity as a baseline condition. In other words, the nervous system assumes that other people will be nearby. Support is not an exception. It is the expected environment. When humans evolved, survival rarely happened in isolation. Food gathering, protection, navigation, learning all occurred within groups. The brain therefore adapted to distribute effort across multiple individuals. Energy conservation became essential. Cognitive resources are limited. Attention, emotion regulation, problem solving all require metabolic cost. Social baseline theory suggests when another person is present, the brain reduces perceived threat and reduces energy expenditure. Experiments using neuroimaging methods produce fascinating results. Participants were asked to anticipate mild electric shocks when alone. Brain regions associated with threat showed strong activation, but when participants held the hand of a trusted partner, the same regions became quieter. The nervous system interpreted shared presence as shared burden. Stress was distributed. Responsibility was no longer singular. Artificial systems process problems individually. individually. Each machine runs its own computation. Human cognition is often collective, distributed across minds, across conversation, across shared attention, across collaboration. Even perception can be social. People interpret ambiguous situations differently when others are nearby. Confidence rises because uncertainty is shared. Psychologists noticed another implication. Loneliness is not only emotional, it is metabolic. When the brain perceives isolation, threat perception increases. Cognitive load increases. Energy expenditure rises because the nervous system must handle every challenge alone. Social baseline theory suggests something profound. Relationships are not luxuries. They are regulatory systems. A trusted person nearby changes how the brain evaluates risk, changes how stress is processed, changes how effort is distributed. This does not mean humans cannot function independently, but independence is often more expensive in terms of energy, attention, and emotional regulation, which is why shared experience feels lighter, why conversation reduces stress, why silent companionship still changes mood. The brain remembers that survival was rarely solitary, it was coordinated, shared, distributed across many minds. Social baseline theory reveals that human strength is not only individual, it is relational. The nervous system was designed not for isolation. For cooperation. For cooperation. For the qualities of another person who reduces the weight of the world. And developmental totality. There is a theory that quietly explains many human relationships. Attachment theory, originally proposed by John Bowlby. The idea suggests that early bonds between child and caregiver shape the emotional blueprint for future relationships. The brain learns connection early, long before language, long before memory. Infants do not understand the world through words, they understand it through proximity, through warmth, through response, through whether someone comes when they cry. These small interactions build neural expectations, patterns of safety or patterns of uncertainty. Psychologists later describe several attachment styles. Secure attachment forms when care is consistent. The child learns that connection is reliable. When stress appears, comfort will follow. The nervous system learns regulation. Anxious attachment develops differently. Care arrives but unpredictably. Sometimes attentive, sometimes distant. The brain begins to monitor constantly, searching for signals, analyzing tone, facial expression, tiny changes in distance. The nervous system remains alert, always preparing for possible loss. Avoid but non-attachment emerges in another environment where emotional signals are minimized, needs are discouraged, dependence is interpreted as weakness. The child adapts by reducing expression. Connection becomes quieter, less visible, not because the need disappeared, but because expression no longer felt safe. Neuroscience research later confirmed that attachment patterns shape emotional regulation. The limbic system and prefrontal cortex learn how to coordinate under stress. A secure bond teaches the brain that distress can resolve, that connection can restore balance. Artificial intelligence learns patterns through data. Human attachment learns patterns through relationship. Each interaction becomes evidence. Each response updates expectation. Over time, these patterns become internal models. How close is safe? How vulnerable is allowed? How trust is negotiated, and yet attachment theory does not suggest that patterns are permanent. Human brains remain plastic. New relationships can reshape expectation. A reliable partner can soften anxiety. A patient friend can rebuild trust. The nervous system gradually updates its model of safety. Connection is therefore not only emotional, it is neurological, a shared regulation between two systems, two minds learning how to stabilize each other, which is why the presence of another person can slow the heart rate, reduce stress hormones, restore cognitive clarity, because the brain remembers that safety has often arrived through another human being. Attachment theory reveals something simple but profound. We are not designed to regulate completely alone. Our nervous systems are built for connection, for proximity, for trust, and then the quiet knowledge that someone will be there. In social psychology, there is a theory that explains one of the strangest tensions inside the human mind: cognitive dissonance. The term was introduced by Leon Festinger, who suggested that people experience discomfort when beliefs and actions do not align. The mind prefers coherence, the story that makes sense, a version
does not feel dissonance. Conflicting data is simply processed. Parameters update, weights adjust. But humans are narrative systems. The brain does not only calculate outcomes, it explains them, it constructs meaning. Which is why contradiction feels personal. Psychologists discover that when dissonance appears, people often try to reduce it. There are several ways. One is to change behavior, to act differently, so belief and action match again. Another is to change belief, to reinterpret the value of the action or the meaning of the conflict. And often this second path is easier, because change in behavior requires effort, but change in interpretation requires language. The mind becomes a negotiator, a quiet lawyer defending identity. A difficult choice becomes reasonable, a mistake becomes justified, a contradiction becomes a story that can still be lived in. Festinger's experiments revealed something remarkable. When people performed a boring task for very little reward, they later described it as more enjoyable than it actually was. Why? Because without a large external reward, the brain needed an internal explanation. The discomfort of doing something unpleasant for almost nothing had to be resolved. So the mind, the story, this reveals something deep about consciousness. Humans do not simply experience reality, they interpret it continuously. Emotion, memory, identity, belief are woven together into a model of the self. Dissonance appears when the model cracks, and the brain moves quickly to repair it. Not always with truth, but with coherence. Athletes know a version of this process. A player believes they are prepared, then performs poorly. The gap between self-image and result creates tension. Recovery requires either change practice or change interpretation. And the same principle moves through everyday life, through relationships, through ambition, through regret. Every time belief and behavior pull in different directions, the mind begins its quiet work trying to restore balance. Cognitive dissonance is not weakness, it is evidence that humans need stories that fit. That identity is more than memory, it is consistency under pressure. And when that consistency breaks, the brain does not stop, it rewrites, reaffirms, reorganizes, searching for a version of reality. The self can continue to in cognitive science, one of the most influential ideas is that the brain operates like a Bayesian system. This idea comes from Bayesian probability, a mathematical framework for updating belief when new information appears. The principle is simple. The brain begins with prior beliefs, expectations formed from past experience. When sensory data arrives, the brain combines those priors with the new evidence to update its interpretation of reality. This process happens constantly, often outside awareness. Artificial intelligence also uses Bayesian reasoning. Algorithms update probability based on incoming data, but the human brain applies this principle to perception itself. Imagine walking through a dark street. You hear a sudden sound. Your brain immediately generates possible explanations when a passing animal another person nearby. The mind evaluates probability based on context. Past experience informs the prior. The sound itself becomes new evidence. Within milliseconds, your brain updates its belief. Psychologists discovered that perception is partly prediction. The brain does not wait for perfect information. It estimates, refines, corrects each new signal, adjusts the model. This is why perception can sometimes be mistaken. If prior belief is too strong, the brain may interpret ambiguous signals incorrectly. For example, when someone expects danger, neutral actions may appear threatening. When someone expects kindness, the same actions may appear harmless. The brain's model shapes interpretation. Artificial systems calculate probability with numbers. Human mind calculate probability with experience. Emotion also influence priors. Fear amplifies risk. Trust reduces suspicion, which means belief itself affects perception. The Bayesian brain is constantly learning. Each interaction updates the prior. Each surprise adjusts expectation. Reality is not perceived as raw data. It is interpreted through evolving belief. Understanding this changes perspective, because disagreement often begins not with different facts, but with different priors. Two minds looking at the same event may reach different conclusions, because their internal models began from different places. The Bayesian brain is therefore never finished. It is always updating, always refining, always negotiating between expectation and observation, trying to produce the most accurate story about the world it is experiencing.
often describes the brain as a prediction engine instead of simply reacting to the world. The brain continuously predicts it. Every sound, every movement, every expression arrives after the brain has already guessed what might happen. This framework is known as predictive coding. The brain constructs a model of reality based on memory, experience, and expectation. Incoming information is compared to that model when reality matches prediction. The brain remains efficient, little adjustment required. But when something unexpected appears, prediction error emerges, and the brain upgrades its model. Artificial intelligence also relies on prediction. Language models forecast the next word. Image systems predict visual structure, but human cognition extends this principle to perception itself. The brain predicts what the eyes will see before the image arrives, predicts the rhythm of a conversation before the next sentence, predicts the emotional tone of a room before anyone speaks. System helps the brain process information quickly, because perception is partly constructed from expectation. Psychologists discovered that expectation shapes interpretation. Two people can observe the same situation, yet experience it differently, because their internal models predict different outcomes. Athletes use prediction constantly. A goalkeeper anticipates where the ball will travel. A driver predicts the motion of traffic. A musician predicts the next chord progression. Without prediction, the world would feel chaotic. Completely new. Artificial systems optimize prediction through computation. Human brains optimize prediction through experience. Each surprise refines the model. Each success strengthens confidence. Each mistake updates expectation. Predictive coding reveals that perception is not passive. The brain actively constructs its version of reality, moment by moment, adjusting its map, refining its model, until the world begins to feel familiar. Not because reality stopped changing, but because the brain learned how to anticipate it. In social neuroscience, there is a phenomenon
was emotional contagion. The idea is simple but powerful. Emotion can spread from one nervous system to another without words, without explanation. Researchers discovered that when humans observe another person's facial expression, subtle muscles in their own face activate. Almost automatically, these micro reactions send feedback to the brain, which interprets the emotion internally. A smile can create warmth, a frown can create tension, even silence can transmit mood. Artificial intelligence can detect emotion through data, but human brain experience emotion through resonance. Neural systems responsible for empathy activate rapidly, particularly in areas linked to social cognition, the anterior insula and parts of the limbic system. These regions translate external expression into internal state. Psychologists studying groups notice something striking. Emotion often spreads through entire rooms. A nervous speaker can create tension in an audience. A calm leader can stabilize collective attention. The brain continuously rereads signals, posture, tone of voice, micro expressions. Each signal adjusts internal perception. Emotional contagion also explains why music is so powerful. A melody carrying sadness or intensity can synchronize mood across listeners. The nervous system aligns easily with sound. Artificial systems transmit information, feeling communication transmits feeling, which means emotion is rarely private. It travels across conversations, across crowds, across relationships, shaping environments. Psychologists sometimes say that emotional climates exist not because people share the same thoughts, but because their nervous systems respond to one another. This phenomenon creates responsibility because every reaction can influence the emotional field around us. Calm spreads, so does fear. Confidence spreads, so does doubt. Emotional contagion reveals that humans are not isolated minds, but interconnected systems, constantly exchanging signals, each expression altering the atmosphere, each moment contributing to a shared emotional rhythm, and in that rhythm a single mood can become something collective.